So Nick, you've been spending years now developing hiring brands for companies, hiring brands for individuals, and even sort of platforms in general. So where are the areas that companies are getting it a little off, or what should they pay more attention to?
You know, I think what happens most frequently with a lot of people is they try to boil the ocean, try to do it all at once. They want their company brand to be their hiring brand, to be their personal brand, to be everything for the rest of the time they have their organization. And I think really looking back at the past couple of years, look at how much the dynamic has changed in the workplace. That means you have to change with it, and you have to consistently be leveling up, growing your organization. How do you show up? We're not stagnant humans, and nor are companies. And being able to showcase that consistently and continuously as you change and shift and grow is really important. And a lot of people just keep it the same.
So what I think when we say leveling up, right? So we have leveling up on talk track. We have leveling up on the quality of cinematography and editing. And maybe leveling up on the precision or fidelity of the signal we're putting out. So can you address each of those with thoughts?
Yeah, so I think that leveling up is going to feel different for each person in each organization, which I think is really important to say at first, because ultimately not everyone's going to be a Joe, not everyone's going to be a TMG, and everybody looks at it and saying that's what I want to be, and that takes work to get there, and it takes consistent leveling up. Now that said, that may say, okay, so in year one, I'm going to tackle LinkedIn, and I'm going to work on my company brand, identify what my intentions are, what I want to get across to the market, and at the same time, I'll work on my personal brand. But then in year two, how has the company shifted? Is it now time to reach out to different platforms? Is it time to amplify my message with paid, with Facebook, with Instagram, if they're applicable to your market? And that's really what's important there as well, is what's the application of what you're doing, and does it make sense for you to spend your time there? And in trying to level up, it's important that you manage those expectations on each platform, because you may be spending time somewhere that ultimately is not going to give you an ROI. The way if you invested more time somewhere to amplify your message, let's say again on paid for LinkedIn, you may see a way better return and be able to amplify your message to a broader audience.
You and I work a lot also with recruiting companies, beside med tech companies, life science companies. And you and I think we coined the term of subject matter expert and amplifying that out into the market. And for the people who don't know, you know, Nick has been one of the primary sort of drivers of my brand over the last couple of years, especially on most of our platforms and with our clients as well. So I just want to get the props there, so when they're talking to you, they know that you know what you're doing and what you're talking about. You've helped develop some of the best brands we've worked on, and those are some big clients. So often people struggle of, where do I start? What do I do? And you and I had coined that phrase of expand out your subject matter expertise at scale. So maybe put a little more into that for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you know, I think we talk a lot about the analog one-to-one distribution of messaging that's happened in the past, and being able to showcase your subject matter expertise is great when I'm able to talk to someone on the phone, but really where we want to go is subject matter leadership. We want you to get to the point where you scale that digitally so that people can really, it works for you while you're sleeping. They're able to understand who you are, understand your messaging without needing to always pick up the phone or always get into that deeper conversation. Great to get there. However, you set the stage for that conversation later by doing that. And it's really important to also understand what is your subject matter expertise. Because for a lot of people, they tend to try to, again, we come back to that boil the ocean because it's always so relevant in what we're discussing, but it's very interesting to notice how many people are trying to do a lot of things and not that well, versus saying, what's my lane? How is my swim lane going to be something that I can really focus in so that I can convey that subject matter expertise at scale? And if you don't focus in on that, you're going to consistently become this kind of adequate look at that place in the market, versus being able to say the way we do, right? We look at med tech and recruiting for the most part and building those companies and careers at scale. If we were to say go in and start talking about marine biology, someone would be like, what are you doing today, right? And that's important to look at, and that's where you can actually get to a subject matter expert level in focusing into what your expertise is.
And that's especially important for the recruiters and those who follow us, and we build recruiting brands as well, is it's okay for you to be an expert in corrugated machinery or medical device or life science or construction, but not as a Wall Street analyst, but as a talent acquisition expert in that category and stay in that lane, or else you're going to blow your sort of gravitas and DNA. Another question I have for you is, we also came up with the Humsing Shout strategy. Maybe for those that are watching, is it always video on Humsing Shout? Is it always video on brand? What would you prescribe for people when they think about Humsing Shout? Explain that. And then how do the different short and long form copy and video come into play?
Well, the way we always like to look at it, and we talk about this all the time, is it's a chorus of voices. So it can't be one thing every single time. There's a fatigue that happens if it's consistently video, consistently an essay being put out, consistently an article. And it's important that your messaging hits all of those categories when it's applicable. It's not always going to make sense to say that this is always an article. You may have something very short to say that's short and sweet and to the point, relevant in the marketplace, and for a quick turnaround, just post that with a photo. And it's important to understand when to kind of amplify that voice a little bit higher. Do you have an event coming up? Did you just hire a lightning rod hire and it's important to showcase that to the marketplace? Then you may say, how do I share this at a higher level and do more with it? But ultimately, there's not one prescription for anybody, and it's not even that it's one prescription for us all the time. So, it's similar if you go to your doctor. They're going to take a look at the blood tests every year, and you're going to say, maybe I might have a new prescription that you need to be on. Same thing here. What is our intention? What are we trying to get across? And what are the big milestones we need to highlight this year? And the same thing goes for that. And what are the best mediums to use for that? And that's something we talk to our clients about all the time, in how to do that in a really strategic, mindful way.
You and I had a meeting today with some of our emerging brands coming out of our firm. And it is very similar to the prescription you give to the emerging brands coming out from the emerging tech companies we deal with. And sometimes you will, and I want you to touch on these, and sometimes you will prescribe about, well, there's a show coming up. And you gave a prescription to some of our emerging brands here, but it's the same prescription you give if I was going to be at AAOS next month, or I was going to be at SDTS down in Houston. So reverse engineer a date on the calendar back, and what should people be thinking about as they develop their content leading up to that crescendo moment?
Right. The biggest piece with it is, what is your intention at that event? Always need to start with, what's the goal? What do we want to get out of this? Because ultimately, if there's no trajectory and kind of focus, you are like the squirrel. You're that purple squirrel chasing everything, because you're never going to be able to get to that point. The idea is to say, okay, if I want to have these 3 conversations because I know these people will be in attendance, or I know that these clients will be there, or my goal is to be able to step out into the contract manufacturing world and share more about that, or the robotics industry, then we need to reverse engineer and say, what content can we capture in the next, let's say, 60 days that we can have that's going to be relevant to those, so that we can start that drip strategy and that hum before, and then what really do we want to amplify in that messaging that 30 days out from the conference. And being able to plan that out is the most important piece, because otherwise it doesn't hit your intention.
One of the things that we're focusing on this year, and we have in past years, but especially this year, is the underutilization of well-done paid content. So what are your thoughts on paid content?
I have a lot of thoughts on paid content. I think the biggest piece with paid content is everybody, and we see this in honestly most things in the world right now, is throw money at it. It's going to solve all the problems. Well, that's just not how the world works. Ultimately, do you have the content? Have you started your organic side of things? Because what works? Do you see that you're getting any feedback organically from your audience that's going to allow you to tailor your paid in a smarter way, in a way that makes more sense for your money, so your money works for you, versus just tossing it away because people say you should use paid? And that's a really important thing to look at strategically, and set up those milestones of, okay, we've got content in the can, this, that matches our intention for the year. We've tested it out on organic. We understand what's working with our market. We're starting to grow our followership. Now we're starting to see, what if this content should go to paid? How do we target that audience? What is our audience? Have we really structured out that piece? You also want to be strategic about how you create the audience that you're reaching out to. And then ultimately, how do you track what happens after paid? Paid doesn't just go and it goes away. You need to be consistently watching it. Have someone on your team daily and weekly look at those analytics, check and see how things are going. Do you know how to A/B test? I mean, there's so many different things that go into it that it's a pretty hefty lift.
And would you prescribe saying that if you've got a good organic, so let's say you've got 15,000 followers, and you put out a piece, and suddenly the numbers are top 10% post, would you then say, hey, that may merit now getting to a broader scale since my organic followers like that, let's double down on that and put it paid?
Yes and no.
Okay.
I think you and I talk a lot about vanity metrics, not getting too tied into that, because it's important to say, it could just have been a random time of day, something happened. However, if you start to notice a certain messaging that people are leaning into, it's not just finding the one post. It's what are you kind of seeing as an overall look at your content, and then go from there. And it could be that post, absolutely. But I do like to pull back and say, there's content that can do fantastic on paid that may just not have been as for the audience you currently have, and vice versa. And if you're trying to grow your audience, you shouldn't always focus on the vanity metrics. So, that's a part there. But I think that in looking at it too, it's like then A/B test that. Then say, okay, I've got this post, it did really well, so maybe we do a lookalike audience to our current set on LinkedIn. But then I test it to another group of the broader audience, and maybe it doesn't do so well. And that's fine. You learn from that, and you figure out with that data moving forward how to engage and grow your audience.
You have done a tremendous amount of work with our clients on developing hiring brand videos for them. So as these heads of HR or heads of engineering or heads of marketing are watching this, what guidance would you give them that they should be thinking about if they're developing a hiring brand strategy and campaign?
Biggest thing is who you'll become working at the organization, and understanding who your audience is in that. This isn't the time where you're trying to capture the new client or look at the investor side of things. I mean, that's great. However, if you really want to grow, you have to look towards what is the individual in the marketplace looking for, and how do I share with them a bit of what it's like to work here and who they'll be able to become in working here. And that's going to look different for everybody. And we do a lot of pre-work with our clients before that. These are not thrown together interviews. We set up questions, we go through, we really dive into what do these roles need, what are your open roles, because that is going to look different too based on what's actually open and what the marketplace looks like. And then even how do we tie that in? How do we tie what's currently going on in the market so that it's a really relevant video and it speaks to that individual to say, you know what, I really want to reach out. That feels like I could see myself with those people. And I think the other side of it is not leaning into one person too hard. Very important that people can see a slew of different people that work in an organization. It doesn't matter if you're a small organization. You can still do that with 5 or 6 people. But when you focus in on one person, your hiring brand feels very much that one person. And if I don't see myself in that person, I actually could miss an opportunity with your organization.
We created something called the 4 pillars in storytelling. Can you share that with the audience of what that 4 pillars does and what they should be thinking about when they create that message for a hiring brand?
Yeah, of course. I think to start, I'd like to throw it back to you to just explain the 4 pillars and really dive into just a hint on each one as to why they're really important from a hiring brand perspective.
Yeah. So you had mentioned, who will I become when I go to work there? That needs to be the meta question all the time. So as you're creating the 4 pillars, it's got to eventually end up with who will that person become when they're watching this content. So let's start there. And then the 4 pillars, let's identify them first. There's market, there's product or service into that market, there's the team, which makes the product or service that services that market, and then there's the mission. And the mission is, why are you showing up every day? So the storytelling on those needs to be, well, am I justified in betting my career on that market over the next 3 to 5 years? Because that's the average stay at a company. And then does the product or service that has promise in that promising market address the real need in that market? And then the team we know mom and dad were right. Who we hang around with is who we become. And maybe as important, it informs your professional network moving forward.
Right.
Because if you're doing a good job in those 3 to 5 years and they move on, and they likely will, they're going to tap you on the shoulder. We know that people all the time find jobs with somebody who they worked with. And then finally, why you're showing up every day. As an example, sure, a software engineer out in the Bay Area might get paid an extra $30,000 working for Facebook, keeping somebody on a browser for another 22 seconds on writing an algorithm. Well, how about writing software that's going to work on a robot that works on fem health, that maybe your mom or sister had dealt with cervical cancer, and that robot in particular services that market? You're more likely to show up more fulfilled every day working on a technology like that. So those are our 4 pillars.
Yeah, and so thank you for explaining those. I think it's important that we always give the background on that as we expand why those are so important in your hiring brand. And just in that little kind of anecdote, you're able to get that feeling of a connection. And I think that's where someone's going to connect to one of those 4 pillars. They may not connect to all 4, but they're going to find a connection within that organization to something there, whether it is a family, past history, whether it's something that they've been lacking at their current organization and they've been really looking forward to having. And so we really lead the messaging when we put together any of these company and hiring brand videos, and specifically hiring brand videos, in the capacity to say, how do we share these pieces in a really clever way that someone is able to visibly see themselves in that chair.
And usually people, so let me ask this question. Do people make their videos too long or too short? And what is the prescribed length as a guideline for you?
I try not to give a prescribed length because I think it depends on what you're doing. But I will say people make things way too long.
Okay.
I mean, we all know we don't sit there in the middle of our day, especially like when you're posting it. If you're posting it in the middle of a work day, I don't have 20 minutes to watch that. And if it's 20 minutes, am I actually even going to see the person I connect with? Likely no. Great to have a long form video for me to save for later and refer back to. I love that strategy. However, anything that's over 2 minutes really gets a little bit too much.
Closed caption.
Yes, absolutely. And we always want to have the closed caption side of things. And what's nice for most people to know is a lot of different platforms allow you to click closed captions and they'll add them for you. So that's great. You don't always have to do it. But that is something that we provide and we really work towards because we know that it enhances the user experience and the viewer experience. And outside of all that, it allows you to watch it in a time where you might not have otherwise had the opportunity. If you're sitting and waiting for a meeting to start, you might want to watch that because not all of us are working from home. We're in an office. We don't want to be disruptive to anyone around us. And it's not like we're sitting there watching the cat videos on YouTube. We're watching something that's important. But if you're on the job hunt or something like that, you may want to be able to have that. So a couple of important things, length, and obviously what is that viewer experience going to be as they engage with your content.
Is there anything I didn't ask you that we should have talked about?
You always ask this question, and I always am like, I wonder what they're going to say. And now that's me. I think one of the things that we've talked about so much is being there for the important moments and being able to showcase them, and that it doesn't always have to be curated. So what's going on in your organization and what can you capture that doesn't mean you have to set up a studio like this? We have plenty of times where we grab pictures of our team on the road and we're able to, that's part of our hiring brand. That's someone seeing this team in action together, being able to experience these things together. And I think the curated versus, this less curated and less put together with all this intention behind it, it's like there's still intention there, it just doesn't need 3 weeks of planning. And it's important that companies and organizations and HR and all of those people recognize that there's capacity for both, and it should be both. Because if it feels too canned, I don't know that I would see myself somewhere.
It doesn't feel as authentic.
Exactly.
Maybe, and a blend of that, it's a great point, is there's got to be a conscious blend of just document a situation versus a curated piece of content. So you brought up something before we go out. Is it going to be more of a challenge now that most likely moving forward, a reasonable percentage of our workforce is not going to be in the office? So how do you develop a hiring brand potentially when your workplace is the room behind you where you just had your Cheerios and your breakfast? So how do you do that?
Yeah. Two things. One, be very considerate of what your background is in a professional setting. I'm not saying you have to go and splurge on something wild or set up your own studio, but maybe the kitchen or where the pets are running around or the background where you've got this light shining in and no one can see your face is likely not the best experience for anyone receiving you on the other end. The other piece of it is video's not always necessary. Be the person that writes articles. Be the person that asks for quotes from members of your organization, highlight people. There's plenty of ways to share without being that original artist, and we talk about this a lot. You can also go find articles that you didn't write and just comment your thoughts on them. So, I think it's not a one-way road. There's plenty of different highways and different forks in the road that will present themselves and will be the right fit for certain people that are not ready to jump in and be on camera every day.
And how about the company from a facility perspective? So one of the cool things we do, and we call it in our organization tech porn, we're able to go into these organizations and shoot these amazing technologies, amazing robots, and these engineers and salespeople and marketing people are there in the 40,000 square foot facility. But now a percentage of the workforce is home. So what do you think the future is going to be for sort of company created, here's where we work videos when the venue may not as be important anymore?
Well, I think an investment still needs to be made. I think it's important, whether it's a GoPro or a Sony camera or something, there's an investment that needs to be made if you want to tell the story. Whether that's with an outside organization like Dragonfly does, or that's somebody internally or hiring somebody internally to support that function, it's its own function and should not be looked at as an add-on. It needs to be looked at as an important piece of your organization and something that you need to invest in. And again, every organization is going to look different, and the prescription for that will be the same style where it is different based on what you're doing. But the idea is to capture however you can, and it may be starting off with a GoPro.
Well, Nick, thanks for making TMG look good, Dragonfly look good, and probably most important, me look good all the time.
Thanks, Joe.
You got
Great
it.
to be here.
I'm Joe Mullings from 160 Studios with the Master. Be well.